remember, the last frame's always got to equal the first. Okay, this is a very basic one here. Why don't we just watch this? And I think I'm recording this at 10 frames per second, so you may not be able to see any of this, but I'm just going to check it for my sake. And I can't hardly see it either. This whole thing's jacking my computer up pretty bad. But you know, that's good enough for this, what we're trying to accomplish here. We're just trying to get the basics here. Now let's run through these keyframes to see exactly what's going on. The first frame, as soon as you click that button on your mouse and the trigger is pulled, imaginary trigger, oh, I'm sorry, the kill switch is pressed. It's going to recoil backward. You know, ordinarily, it's not good to go from one very far distance in just one frame, and I do it pretty much only for shoots, sometimes for some other things, but the cases are rare. Let's run through this in slow motion if you're copying this here. See how these frames are approached? See how this goes smoothly to the other one here, and we've got these things here, and I don't want to get into that. I can mess with that all day long. But just know that it's set up to be smooth. It's just got a fancy thing over here. Don't worry about that. It's the way you want it. Trust me. Geez, you know, I'm having trouble trying to think of how to explain this. Well, I'm trying. Well, how about this? How about this? Well, I'm sure you can tell what's going on here. It's always nice to come on down about 10 frames here and have the thing dip in. You could actually, if you wanted to, lower it down with movement here. It might look a little odd when it's got the smooth controllers on. In fact, it does look very odd to me right there. But you know what? Shoots are one man's crappy shoot is another man's delicacy. I know a lot of people don't like the way I do them. That's the way I like them, not because they're easy to do, and these are very easy to do. That's why I started with this. They're simpler than anything you can do. They're beyond simple. You can do them, and look how many keyframes there's. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. 5 keyframes, and you've got a shoot animation. I guess I should point out the keyframe placement here is very important. You can alter how this gun feels, how this animation feels very, very abruptly just by changing some of the locations of the keyframes. I'll give you an example. Why don't you, instead of a quick recoil here, we'll have a slow one on the 3rd frame when it finally reaches the peak of its upward recoil here, and look how different that looks. It looks slow. It looks you know, like a lump of clay, like it doesn't have any sharp edges in it at all. You know, I'm just making stuff as I go along. Lumps of clay, sharp edges. It's like I'm trying to explain to you a painting. Not that these are anything close to a work of art. But, you know, it's tough to explain these type of things. I'm sure you know the basics and the fundamentals of exactly what animation is and how it works. Or you wouldn't be watching these things unless you were either trying to improve or find out what in the world this guy, your VTM host, is doing with his free time. Let's get away from the movement of the gun. That's something that's so subjective and can be changed so easily that, you know, you can spend hours making the perfect shoot animation, or you can spend 5 minutes like me. But let's get to these fingers here. Obviously, you know, you can go all out with these things, and you know, if you wanted to, you could have this thumb here, grip the gun in a different way. You could even have the hand move back a little bit with the recoil. You know, the choice is yours, or as my hero Captain Planet would say, the power is yours. You've got so much free reign in all of this. Alright, let's get this trigger finger going here. Right click on the parent bone to these lesser bones here, and set a keyframe for them at 0. But you know, if I recall, we should have the -47 here set up. I tend to use -1 for these type of things, and I always use -1 if I'm copying frame 0. I always use -1. It's a good practice to get into, and if you've got, you know, keyframes changing to 0 like this right here, the 0 will not be what the end frame is. So you've got to copy it to a -1, or you could just use a -47. But I'd get into the practice of -1 because it's going to help you a lot of times for some other things. So it's good to have more. So basically, we're just going to pull this trigger here. There's really not anything fancy about it. You might want to come up here, check your constraints, make sure everything's on this axis here. This top one doesn't have to be, but you know, when you're looking at it and it's going to be recoiling back, you don't want people to notice it. It's just it's a subtle thing that you shouldn't be able to tell is there. Also, you may actually want to do this in first-person mode, as you're going to be looking at that trigger finger. If you want it to look a special way, go right ahead. Oh, I should also tell you, I repositioned this gun here. I thought it was way too far out and way too far up. You could possibly see that the forearm was actually not attached to any other arm while you were in game with it. I did that before I started the VTM. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that all to you. Those of you who are cheering now that I finally got to mentioning what you were thinking about, congratulations for noticing. Zoom extents. Alright, and you've got the trigger here. Now the trigger doesn't have a keyframe yet. You've always got to remember that. Because even if you're using Max 6, and I told you it would set a keyframe for 0 if you moved it, if you set one for 0, well, you ain't got crap. It's a good work and waste of your time. Set it for 0. Set it for -1. Now, maybe I should have gotten to the fact that if you don't have the trigger depressing, or if you don't have the finger depressing the trigger on the first frame of the animation, if you do it on the second, for example, if you've noticed, the recoil doesn't start until the second frame. And I know a lot of people like to put the recoil on the first, but I don't, because it makes the animation feel hollow to me. And that's another made-up word that I can't really explain. It just feels hollow. Okay. This guy's nuts. What is he talking about? Talking about hollow? Talking about chocolate cake when he's animated? Just sit down and have a nectarine. Everything's going to be alright when this is done. Grab this trigger here. You've got to have it depressed. And again, maybe I didn't even finish what I was talking about there. I just got running off on a tangent. If you don't have it on frame 0, you're going to look like the trigger's rapidly pulling it. It's not an automatic. It's just rapid. Which, you know, for this isn't a machine gun or a... I know the realism people are going to kill me. He said machine gun. It's an automatic. For those of us who are not into the weapon lingo, I'll call it a machine gun for them. If you're not using machine gun here, you don't want to be tapping the trigger now, do you? God, I've gone on forever and I haven't even moved this stupid thing. Let's finally rotate this trigger and put it back to where it needs to be. Remember, we've got to add -1 set up to where its default position is. Remember? Good. So, you're going to ask, what do we do now, Nick? Well, we've got to bring these back to 0, correct? Of course we do. You cannot just make these go back to 0. I'm going to show you another very important part of animating here. See how good it was for me to think this out? Oh, by the way, I haven't thought of what I'm going to do for the other ones. Surprise, surprise. I'm going to get into studying here. Alright. This is a milestone moment here. You should all pay attention to this. Because we're using the smooth Bezier control, the interpolation between the keyframes, we're using smooth. And even if you're using float, you know, maybe even linear. I mean, I really haven't tried those other ones that much, and I use them for certain circumstances, but I don't rely on them, and I don't use them for everything, obviously, because it doesn't look that great. If you're using smooth and float, and I'm just going to say this for everything, if you're using anything, the way that Max, and I know this is Max, it makes animating so easy. You could just, as I just showed, you put 5 keyframes in it, you got the smoothest shoot animation that's ever smoothed. The way these keyframes work is they don't go from A to B to C to D. If you have 3 keyframes set up, and maybe I'll give you an example of this in a minute. If you've got 3 keyframes set up and you have from A to B to C, Max does not bring the bone to A, and it does not just bring it to B, and it does not just bring it to C. The way that the I know this is smooth and the float. I'm just going to say last time. That's the last disclaimer. The way this works is it's going to mix in a way 3 together. You know, the scientists of Max are up in arms right now because I said that. Again, I don't know the rules that well, but I know how to play by them. let's practice what we preach here. For example, if I wanted to set this at 0, this is just an animation, obvious animation moment with a light bulb come on. You want it to start heading back to 0 at this point, so you'll have to put another keyframe here. So it's going to start going back to 0 at 12. Does everyone follow that? I'm sure you're just going to have to get used to these things. This is just an obvious thing, whether you're using Max, Maya, whatever. That's the way it works. You want this to be the frame as, you want frame 12 to be the same as 0, and then it's going to head back to the -1 position, which is going to be the last position of the animation, which also is the first frame of the animation for every other animation. It's the idle. Alright? I hope you all follow that. Not trying to be confusing. Now, what did I say about mixing the two together? Look what happens here. Do you see that finger go straight through that gun? Do you see that? Do you see it? There's a few reasons for this. Remember when I told you in the second video, I believe it was, negative keyframes can and do have an impact on positive keyframes? Well, what's -1 to 0 and then to this? Do you see how the smooth interpolation, that's what we're using here, is going to go, because it's going so rapidly from the -1 position, which, as you recall, is the idle position, because it's going so rapidly to a depressed back position like that, it's got to make up the recoil, baby, and it's doing it right there to get back to where it is on 12. I hope everyone understands that, and it's something that I can't really put into words. You've just got to know. Now, for example, let's prove this point here. Let's change 0, which is a depress here, to -1. As you recall here, -1 is the idle position. Let's do that. Do you notice it going back now? You do not, because this is proof that the negative keyframes do have an impact on positive ones. As well, it's proof that the 3 keyframe rule, it's going to blend these 3 together with recoil, and it's gonna do exactly what I predicted. Sorry if I'm sounding a little weird here when I can't find the words to describe exactly what I'm talking about. Hit the back button there if you didn't see it. I undid the changing of that to this. On the flip side here, well, you might ask, how do you deal with this? Why, this sucks, Nick. I can't believe this crap. What is this absolute garbage? How are we going to fix this? We need the -1 position, do we not? We do. So, this is what you do. This is what I call studding. You know, there's another made-up word there, studding. Oh my God, the Max geniuses, the algorithm masters, and the aloof elite are scratching their heads and being angry with me right now, but I'm going to call it studding, because that's kind of what it does. Right-click on here, set a keyframe at 1. Now, what did I say about the 3 keyframe rule? Well, it goes from -1 to 0, and before it has a chance to gather any recoil to split, as you saw, to go back in to the gun, if you remember, to go back to frame 12, before it can do that, you put a studding thing here, and I really don't know what to call it, but that's what I'm going to call it, a stud. Now, if you try to come over here and set this to 0, remember? Alright, do you notice that? It doesn't go back into the gun, because we've got this little thing here, this little stud, it's holding back the dam waters, so to speak. It's like a dam. It's holding back the recoil and the relief, so that you can start brand new and fresh on 12. Now, what do you say? Let's assign, maybe on 18 will be good enough, let's assign these to -1. Do you see this? Do you see how that works? Alright. We've got to do the same thing for the trigger. Also, you should note that you're going to have to stud these too. And I mean, it's not important to do for this, and I'll get to studying a lot of crap later, and I'm going to try and point it when I see it and explain why you need it somewhere and why you don't need it somewhere, but for this is what you need to know. Do you see that? Wow, that was weird. Perfect. I'm going to watch this and make sure it's timed up right. It could actually stand to go a little bit back. Why don't we'll have it on frame 12. Remember frame 12, the frame that it starts to head back to 0. It finishes 0. Let's just put on 20 so it's easily remembered. 12 to 20. Now we're going to have to do the same thing to the trigger. I hope I selected the trigger there. I can't really tell. Can't tell.